We do have three esteemed guests with us today who are going to be leading our CMMC discussion in a panel style. First of all, CMMC is a cybersecurity maturity model certification. It's gone through a bunch of iterations. We're on version 2.0 right now. And the heart behind our presentation today is to help people on the call understand what we're hearing in the field, questions that your peers might have had or that you might have had but didn't ask. So we have some questions that we've heard from the field prepared. I do want to encourage everybody who's joined to ask questions in the chat section. Ken Schwartz will be monitoring that. And if there are questions, we'll do our very best to answer them today. So without further ado, I want to first introduce the three gentlemen who will be speaking today. The first is going to be Matt Travis from the CMMC Accreditation Board. Matt, could you give a quick introduction?
Hey, Jeff, thank you, and great to be with Arctic Wolf and Doc's team. So thanks to you and Ken for the invitation. So I'm Matt Travis, the CEO of the Cyber AB, which, as Jeff said, is the CMMC accreditation body. We are a independent, nonprofit organization that is the exclusive implementation partner for the Department of Defense, or with the Department of Defense, to accredit C3POs, certify individuals, and oversee the CMMC ecosystem. And it's great to be with you today.
Thank you, Matt. Our partner Docs Electronics is a CMMC RPO, and from Docs we have Pat Shaw. Patrick?
Good morning, everyone. And Jeff, thank you so much for having us. Again, my name is Patrick Shaw. I've been working here at Docs for over 10 years, and I've been doing auditing as a senior information systems auditor in the last several years of my tenure working here. So I head up a whole team as far as to look at the physical, administrative, and technical aspects of CMMC and deforestation 171 in a very big way with my department. And I'm just happy to be here to give further, hopefully, clarity to maybe some questions that again people might have just moving forward and getting more compliant underneath the regulation.
All right, Pat, we appreciate it. And last but certainly not least, Siraj from Arctic Wolf, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Jeff. So I'm Siraj Khatri, one of the pre-sale system engineer here at Arctic Wolf. Joined Arctic Wolf about a year ago now. Before that, I was in IT for about a decade, working in energy, education, and finance sector. Have a master's in security technology through the U of M as well. So very happy to be on the call, see some of the questions come up, and then how we can help from a cybersecurity perspective.
All right, thank you, team. So without further ado, we will ask some questions. Again, these are questions that came from the field and from engagements that we've been involved in from Matt's perspective, from our partner Docs Electronics, and then through our sales efforts at Arctic Wolf. So these are real questions that we're hearing from people in the defense industrial base. At the end of this, which should be 45 to 60 minutes, if you're wondering, we will send out a survey, and about a quarter of the people who are joining today will get a gift card. So there's limited quantity, but we've got that. The survey is meant to really help understand what further questions you might have outside of what we're dealing with today and how we might be able to help you. So Matt, just want to kind of start this off with you. Docs Electronics has been doing gap assessments for the defense industrial base for almost 7 years now. And we're still hearing from many organizations that they don't believe that CMMC will ever truly be required. Will it?
It's a fair question, Jeff. And before I get into it, let me again reemphasize that even though we work closely with DoD, nothing I say should be construed as official DoD or U.S. government policy. But, as you think about it, I've been in this job almost 2 years, and CMMC still hasn't officially started. But if you really look at the evolution of supply chain security within the DIB, it very much is going to happen. It'll be going to happen here in the not too distant future. And time certainly seems like it might be moving slowly, but I bet you when CMMC becomes a mandate, there'll be plenty of folks who wish they had gotten ready sooner. And so we really try to push back against some of those sentiments about, will this ever happen? And if you really look at what the department has done since first introducing CMMC. You had 1.0, and then the new administration came in and went to 2.0, but 2.0 really strengthens the anchor of CMMC into national policy. There's actually, we're in the middle of rulemaking to make CMMC official, and there are two rules now. So CMMC used to be just a procurement rule. That's the Title 48, not to get too arcane, but in the Code of Federal Regulations, or CFR, Title 48 deals with government contracting, essentially, and that's what CMMC was initially. What CMMC 2.0 now provides for is also a Title 32 rule, and that's the part of the federal code deals with national defense policy. So CMMC is now going to be listed in two parts of the Code of Federal Regulations, just like many other big DoD programs, and that's a very positive thing. If you look at what the Cybersecurity Commission has said, if you look at what, timely, just earlier this morning, the President's National Cybersecurity Strategy was released. And if you read that, there are certainly strong signals that a heavier regulatory hand is going to be needed within critical infrastructure, which the DIB is a part of, to ensure that digital risk is being actively managed. And we're no longer just taking people's word for it that they implement responsible cybersecurity practices. So if you can get past some of the, the iterations of CMMC as it's evolved and recognize, okay, we're still not live yet, but the requirements have been in folks' contracts for quite a long time. NIST 800-171 has been around for a while, and I think it'll be a few years from now, people will look back at these conversations about will or won't happen, because third-party validation of cybersecurity, I think, will be the norm throughout the government contracting community, throughout the 16 sectors of infrastructure, and CMMC is really leading the charge on that.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. We're seeing a lot of cross in all industries, third-party vendor risk management in place. So with or without this being finalized, it's going to be your third parties requiring you to do it because they want to work with safe people. So Matt, good answer there. So in terms of the rulemaking process, any idea on when these requirements might be finalized? I know you're meeting with folks in DC on a regular basis. Do you have any sort of timeline?
I can kind of try to read the tea leaves a little bit from what's been publicly published. For those not familiar with federal rulemaking, it's a pretty, government-only process, at least in the early stages. And so we're not part of that. We weren't involved in drafting the rule. But if you look at what essentially the White House published in January, that's the Office of Information Regulatory Affairs, part of OMB. They're the ones that really coordinate federal rulemaking. When they published the schedule for the next 6 months, it showed the CMMC rules emerging from rulemaking for public comment this May. That might be ambitious based on where I think things still stand. I think the department's still kind of working on getting the final language solidified. But sometime this, late spring, early summer, hopefully that rule will emerge. There'll be then a 60-day public comment period. And then following that, unless the designation to the rule changes and it gets fast track status, which right now it's not showing that, it's showing normal status, then the department will have to respond to all of those public comments before the rule can go final. That really depends on how many comments they get. So if there's only a few comments, maybe it would take them just a few months to respond to the questions or comments from the public. If there's a lot, then it could go into 2024. But we try not to, look, it's going to happen. The Congress wants it to happen. The department wants it to happen. And frankly, a lot of industry wants it to happen because they recognize folks who are realizing what China's been playing the long game and really, using that weakest link approach to compromise the industrial base to get at very important information that DoD entrusts the industrial base with. That this is going to happen, and it'll be here before we know it. Even though we still got several months to go on rulemaking, so that's kind of where we see it. That 2023 might prove to be a great year for folks to continue to prepare, to hire those practitioners and consultants who can help you implement 800-171 and help you prepare for a CMMC assessment. And frankly, we might get into a bit more. You can actually get an unofficial CMMC type assessment here from the ecosystem, but rulemaking will continue, and we'll know more when that draft rule or the initial rule is published out of the White House later this summer.
Yeah, we'll look forward to that. And this is unscripted here, Matt. This is why I love these things. I just had a thought. It's certainly true that upstream prime contractors can say, you're too risky, I don't want to work with you, right? Even outside of the finalized rulemaking, they can still make decisions that, if I'm a manufacturing firm, for example, and I go up to Raytheon or Boeing or one of the prime contractors, those folks can say, even though things are in flux with CMMC, you aren't doing what you need to do, so I'm not going to give you the contract, right? They still have the opportunity to say that.
Most certainly. I'm going to push back on your use of the word in flux. I don't think it's in flux at all. It's progressing. This may not be progressing with the alacrity that we would like, but absolutely primes are really key movers in this, because they're going to be incurring inordinate risk if they're doing business with subcontractors that are not implementing, in many cases, requirements that they already have. If you go back to, again, how this all evolved with the initial DFARS rule, the 7012 clause, it meant 171, and then we get to the later DFARS clauses of 19 and 20 that now make you a test in SPRS that you've implemented, and then gives the DIBCAC the authority to kind of spot check. CMMC was just that next rule that provided for the third-party validation. So when people talk about this as a new requirement, and some of the folks who are ululating about, oh, CMMC, this is going to be too much, the requirements are not new. It's just that third-party assessment, which will validate and really bring that trust that is needed in the defense sector right now, where you can't just take folks' word for it. And I think primes are recognizing that. We're certainly hearing anecdotally of some of the larger primes, requiring either verbally or in writing that you're going to do business with company X, you need to implement 800-171 and start moving. So we like that.
All right. Thank you. And I know, Pat, from Docs, you're doing a lot of these CMMC readiness engagements, you call them. You've probably seen some of that too, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, you definitely, you're seeing that, those clauses are being flowed down. And again, I think it's more so kind of a twofold process of identifying, in this 800-171 and the, 7012 clause, because, I think what ends up happening is, organizations might just go, yep, we want to work with this prime. It's great. Let's just get it through, and not really look strategically at what is actually required of them to perform in that particular audit. So again, they're not aware of the cybersecurity, of DFARS and CMC on that docket. That also leads to obviously internal issues of not meeting that compliance, as well as if they are flowing it down from them down to another subcontractor, they also need to follow that as well. So they're responsible for their part of the chain of events as well as thereafter, until that, CUI or FCI or the product is basically given back upstream to their client. So yeah, they really should. And if anything, you take away from this, definitely, have your salespeople, have the people that are ingesting any contracts, and have people that are identifying what regulations, even outside of CMC, DFARS 800-171, just to make sure that the organization is meeting those specific efforts properly.
Thank you. Matt, going back to you, in the absence of a date that CMMC will be finalized, and I heard your comment on the tea leaves, and I appreciate that insight from you. But in the absence of an absolute date for finalization here, what advice can you provide to DIB members that might be in our audience? So, people are going to be somewhere along the line of compliance and having looked at it. Like, what are you seeing out in the field?
Well, my first message to folks is there's no reason you have to go down the CMMC journey alone. There is plenty of help out there, and firms like Docs and others, practitioners. That's really what we've been doing for the past couple of years, is trying to build up this ecosystem of practitioners that can help DIB companies prepare for assessment companies. They're going to be doing those CMMC assessments and then helping recruit all the individual assessors who are going to work for those firms, not to mention the training providers and the curriculum developers and all of that. So it really is a true ecosystem. And so that you'd be crazy as a company not to seek some assistance. There are real experts in the field who have been following CMMC, here on the panel today, who really are the experts who understand the standard and how it needs to be implemented, how it's going to be assessed. And that's my first piece of advice. And the second is really what I harped on earlier, is that time is right now is on your side. There is going to be a reckoning of companies that have not been, seeing this train coming and who keep kicking the can down the road or sticking their head in the sand, whatever metaphor you want to use. And all of a sudden they're going to find either from their prime who no longer is going to sub to them, or from a solicitation that's going to have the requirements that they're not eligible for. And that's, I think, a key point, is that it's, you won't even win a contract once CMMC starts if you have not been certified. And so, because of the kind of the way that rulemaking has progressed at a slower pace than we'd like, this has had the benefit of giving companies more time here in 2023 than I think we probably thought when we were back in 2022. So use that time wisely, get familiar with it. There's plenty of resources out there to help you along.
Love the answer. Thank you, Matt. Ken is sending me questions that we're getting in the chat section. So whoever can answer this, the question is, if we are a prime with NASA on a smaller project, should we be able to view other vendors on the SPRS? Is it such that we get listed as ability to check on our SPRS status on suppliers? In other words, vendors we procure from. Is that something we should be cognizant of how to do?
I'll jump in first. NASA's got its own policies, and one of the things that we're certainly encouraging the federal government to do is to have a uniform standard and not have different departments have different requirements for industry. I think that's, common sense, and anything else is a bit crazy talk. Recognizing that hasn't happened yet. There's still, whether it's NASA, DHS, others are still kind of working their way through what their industry requirements will be. I can't speak to what access a NASA contractor will have to SPRS data. I'm not sure they would have it, but there are others that are more informed on that topic than I am.
Okay, thank you. We did get another question here, which is, I love this. This is what we were hoping for here. What advice can you give to contract holders that flow down CUI?
Well, I guess I'll jump in. So I guess you just need to determine, what are you flowing down, right? If you are flowing down in the performance of any CMMC, DFARS, and 171 project, you need to be, definitely aware of the data that you're sharing in between, yourself and a subcontractor. Now, again, this might be something that you might not need to, flow down that clause, because maybe you're just buying a widget, hey, company ABC, we're going to do a COTS item, commercial off the shelf, that you can buy from anywhere, that you are then, as the company, taking it, refurbishing it, making changes to it, that might not need a flow down. But if there's any sensitive information, drawings, communications, specifications that the subcontractor that you're employing downstream, you would want to make sure that they're meeting the same standards as you are, right? So ultimately, you want both sides of you and your organizations that you're dealing with are underneath this same umbrella. So you would probably want to do what your primes are doing currently, of giving you questionnaires and, how far along are you? Find that comfort level of where you think that they should be, but ultimately, really all the 110 controls should be, implemented. So that way there is that cadence and there is that cybersecurity around the particular project.
Thank you, Pat. I appreciate it. We had a comment here, another one. I understand controls of NIS 800-171 have not changed, but the absolute requirements from CMMC not allowing POAMs is a change. FIPS is a major nightmare. We're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on FIPS validated solutions. If we have no option for POAMs, some complex Windows, Linux, Docker environments are having a very difficult time with this. So there's not really a question there. That's more of a comment. This is somebody who's obviously doing this in the field. How would you address that? I know cloud environments are becoming more popular. So the word Docker, if you're not familiar, is a containerized cloud environment, very different from standard on-premise environments of the past. So any thoughts on that comment?
I'll just point out, Jeff, that if I understood the comment correctly, for CMMC 2.0, which is being developed now, there is and will be an accommodation for POAMs. We don't know quite the details. That's part of the rulemaking process, but that was one of the changes from CMMC 1.0 to 2.0, that POAMs with some limitations will be part of CMMC. And so I think that will give, I know that the FIPS requirements can be a bit tricky. So not sure if the POAM will apply to that particular practice or not, but there will certainly be POAMs allowed in CMC 2.0.
Thank you. And I love the off script here. This means people are really learning here. DoD provides STIGs for 800-53. Will they ever provide the same for 800-171? Seems they make requirements could help simplify the efforts if they provided useful tools.
Yeah, I think somewhere down the road they might do that. You know, it would definitely be beneficial to see that the variance between 53 and 171. I'm not sure why we haven't seen that yet. I haven't really drilled into, you know, their back end, but, you know, I have done in some audits, you know, a 53, you know, just a baseline just to see where they are and maybe refine it a little bit. But there might be other ways of finding those particular waypoints of hardening the environment. But again, 53, obviously you're definitely more scope or very direct approach to get at least a baseline. So it's not a bad idea. But yeah, until that they can, you know, basically have a 171 STIG, definitely would be beneficial to everyone involved.
Thank you, Pat. Another question, how much time will be provided after CMMC version 2.0 is finalized for implementation? I totally disagree that there's nothing new from prior specs and don't feel that we should be held to having these things ready day one. What are your thoughts? We don't feel that anyone should need a third party to implement this and feel it is just more government overhead that is unnecessary.
I'll jump in on part of that, Jeff. You know, I think what the department drove them to do this is that other approaches to instilling greater digital trust within the industrial base haven't worked. I mean, initially, again, if you go back to the original evolution, we're going to give you the requirements, 70-12 clauses, and unfortunately, too much of industry treated it like any other term and condition in the contract. You know, when you go at the small print at the back of the contract, yes, I pay taxes, I'm using E-Verify, yeah, I do cybersecurity, fine, whatever. Okay, that's not working, so we're going to make you self-attest and enter those scores in SPRS. And that clearly wasn't working because companies were entering scores that did not accurately, in many cases, reflect their true cybersecurity disposition. So then we have the ability for DIBCAC to kind of knock on the door and check, but that's not scalable. What is scalable is having an approach of a conformity regime, which has been used in many other aspects of industry. And yes, is it government getting involved? It certainly is, but we're dealing with government information. And so I think that's important to recognize that what CMMC is designed to protect is controlled unclassified information, federal contract information that industry has, frankly, the privilege of accepting as part of, you know, the business relationship you have. And I always say, if you've been in the market of supporting the Department of Defense, well, market conditions have changed, and that's just the reality of it. Before I got into CMMC, I was at CISA, and I certainly saw the threat intel on a daily basis, and cyber threat actors are becoming only more sophisticated, more aggressive, more creative. And again, it's much easier to compromise medium to small business within the DIB than it is a .mil environment. So that's what we need to protect in a much better fashion.
So layering onto that, Matt, it's almost like a layup here. So medium to small business. So somebody asked, do you have a recommended template for flow down vendors that are small mom and pop service providers in the manufacturing service industry? The feedback we are hearing from service providers is that it is not fiscally worth it for them to go through this process. To be honest, it barely is for us as a tier 2/tier 3 provider.
Well, we're the accreditation body. We don't get into providing templates for those kind of things. Maybe, you know, Pat or Suraj can speak to that. But I know the department is certainly sensitive to potential attrition within the industrial base of small or medium-sized firms that don't view the investments are going to be necessary to meet these requirements to remain in the DIB. That's, you know, something I know the DoD takes very seriously. It's part of why rulemaking has gone, is because they're trying to make sure there are plenty of provisions to allow for that. And one of the changes in CMMC 2.0 at that first level 1, which is just the FCI level, that remains, or that reverted to self-attestation there's going to be more teeth to it. It's going to require a corporate official to attest. And they'll likely, you'll hear more and more from lawyers who follow CMMC about Small Claims Act invocations, those kind of things. But again, I go back to if this is the business you're in, these requirements are not new. Frankly, the requirements to implement 80171 are higher than the requirements to hire a C3PO to get assessed. And those requirements of 80171 have been there for quite some time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Another question, will level 2 of CMMC still be bifurcated into self-assessment and third-party assessment? And if so, how do you determine it?
Officially, that again, not speaking for DoD, but my understanding, you'll still see that in the briefings from when 2.0 was announced. That in a way, frankly, in my view, they did this to try to make sure that we would scale the ecosystem. Right, if you just turn the switch on right after rulemaking's over, and you make every contract, level 2 requirement for assessments, then the ecosystem may not be big enough right there to support all of that. So, it's a risk management approach to look at, okay, what COI maybe is not as important, that we can, at least for the first few years, allow a self-attestation. Defense officials have said themselves, they didn't necessarily walk it all the way back, but they certainly said that those level 2 self-attestation will be pretty rare, maybe a little bit more in the first year or two. But if you have kind of a level 2, that's where your contract is likely to sit. You should be preparing for a third-party assessment.
Okay, thank you. And I'll table a few of these questions. We'll come back to them. This is great, the interaction and the feedback from the folks on the line here. Matt, I had one more prepared question for you I want to make sure we get to, and then we'll get to some questions, and Pat, we'll jump into your section here. So Matt, do you have any feedback from the DIBCAC as to how their voluntary assessment program is going and what they're finding?
Sure, Jeff, let me just first kind of set the stage. So right now, even though rulemaking still goes on, the department has recognized the investment that not only the DIB, but the CMS ecosystem have made to get ready for this. And so using existing authorities that the DIBCAC has, and that's the Defense Industrial Base Cybersecurity Assessment Center. So that's within DoD. There's authorities allow them to partner with industry, i.e. the C3POs, to conduct essentially DIBCAC high assessments, which is what that what they're able to do under the DFARS 20 clause. And so what this does, however, for those early adopters who have implemented 80171 and want to get assessed voluntarily, joint teams of DIBCAC assessors and authorized C3PO assessors conduct that assessment. So DIBCAC high, so the score is recorded. And if the score is 88 or above, the way the rule is being written, my understanding is that the department intends to convey level 2 certification to those firms. So essentially, it's not a CMMC assessment yet, but if you go through the the voluntary program, it'll convert to a CMMC certificate after rulemaking. So to your question, how's it going? It's going pretty well. We've got over 60 some odd companies who have signed up. I've got about a dozen or so that have been assessed, and those numbers continue to grow. What we're seeing is some of the lessons learned is, one, make sure your team is prepared. You might have just like the CISO and some other folks preparing for CMMC, but when you have those assessments and they're doing interviews, it's the other employees are going to be brought into the mix. Removable media is another thing. People always think CMMC is just about the digital practices, but it does look at physical media, removable discs, what have you. So don't forget about that. I think there's also been a lot of the physical security aspect of it, of protecting your facility and where CUI and FCI are stored is part of it, and making sure that that you understand going in who's doing what from an assessment perspective, and understanding what the DIBCAC will do and what the C3POs will do. So we appreciate the department accommodating this, because essentially getting that muscle movement within the CMMC ecosystem and allowing those defense firms who are ready to go ahead and get assessed.
Thank you. That's helpful. Yeah. So don't forget the physical security side of it. That's good. I still see more questions coming in. We'll get to those. Everybody, thank you. Keep them rolling here. Pat, I'm going to switch gears and ask you a question. Mm-hmm. You have been doing CMMC engagements for over 7 years. What are the top things that most organizations in the DIB are failing during your CMMC readiness engagements? You know, Matt just touched on an area. Hey, don't forget removable media, right? So in your 7 years of readiness engagements that you perform at docs, what are you seeing, and what can people do? What are the low-hanging fruits that just about everybody has red on that they could turn green?
Yeah, for sure. So I think maybe this is just a conception of the regulation and maybe cybersecurity in general. It's not just an IT issue, right? So the IT is definitely the backbone to make that work and to implement. And there's a lot of obviously tool sets and mechanisms for that to be successful. But just like Matt was saying, when you come and get a audit, it's not just, hey, we're going to interview IT and we're out of here. We're going to look at physical. We're going to look at how your admins are handling policies and procedures. So I think it's more of a C-suite or company leadership issue, if you will, that you need buy-in across the board. You need people to be working together, that it's not just, hey, let's just throw it to IT. Let's just make some good configurations on the firewall. And not to say that it's misconstrued as that, some people here probably are definitely understanding the severity of it, but if you're very new to this, it could be very easy to fall into, oh yeah, it's just an IT issue. I think it really takes a village to make this work. Thus, your company, basically integrating all across the board. Because again, CUI comes through and basically gets processed all the way through your company to the very exit, to the creation and the destruction or saving of the CUI or FCI that you have. So in the whole line of events, again, IT is not going to be the only one on the hook. There's going to be lots of other things to consider, administrative, technically, and physically. So I think the more that you open that narrative up, the easier that you'll be able to then get buy-in and other people involved to really solidify and get that maturity that you're going to need for, let's say, a level 2 certification.
All right.
Hey, Jeff, if I could just echo what Pat said, it's a great point, because a lot of people think that CMMC is a kind of a checklist, type of a inspection. It really is trying to get at, it's a conformance regime. Do you conform to the standard throughout your organization? Is the business culture of your company one that respects and implements and maintains normal cybersecurity hygiene? This is basic blocking and tackling, and so it really is looking at, does that culture of cybersecurity permeate throughout your organization? And I think it's a great point.
Yeah, well done. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll dip into one of the questions here as a segue. Obviously, the blocking and tackling that Matt mentions comes with a cost, right? There are tools, there are services, there are things that need to be done and time spent on these things. One of the attendees asked, I'm a small business, 4 employees, 1 location, no manufacturing, extremely limited CUI. We only sell commercial off-the-shelf products and don't create CUI. I can justify the cost to become CMMC level 2, but the predicted cost of the audit is $40,000 every 3 years, and it's hard to swallow. What do others think of this cost?
Well, I guess my question is, if you're only selling COTS products, I'm going to assume that you're not manipulating or you're not getting CUI specifications, from a prime or the DoD directly. So you might be this level 1, right? Those contracts might come in, which again, Matt was saying, FCI, Federal Contract Information. So that would leave you at level 1, which is only 17 controls to abide by. So again, the cost might go down for that because there's less things that you need to do, 17 controls versus 110. There's definitely a disparity of cost and time and effort. But that might be just to foresee what's actually in the contracts, right? What is being provided, and making sure that, again, your prime or whoever you're working with is aware of, what you're actually doing, in the performance of that project or maybe that PO that you have. Because it could be very well and very easy to maybe go look at, you're buying widgets from us. There's nothing specific, the guy down the street could buy the exact same thing. Does this make sense? It is okay to at least challenge your prime if you're comfortable. So that way you can be putting yourself in the organization in a better light, possibly with less things to worry about, if it is true that you're not getting CUI in that aspect.
And Pat, remind me too, level 1 of CMMC 2.0 could also be done through self-assessment and doesn't have to be third party.
Correct. So that's all self-assessment, and you're only getting FCI. So there's there's definitely protections that you need, and you want to protect the FCI. But as soon as you're getting control on classified information, which is going to be more CTI controlled technical information or CDI controlled defense information, or so on, lots of different acronyms for the more specificity of data points for CMMC. But so it might be just reorganizing and seeing, what those contracts are, what you actually are providing, and maybe going, hey, Mr. Customer, can you just send us a PO or just if our contact information, we'll fulfill it. And maybe you're just at level 1 at that point because you're not getting or needing, the CUI that maybe is given to you for no reason.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
Jeff, I just add a couple other points. I mean, Pat and Suraj are spot on that, but 2 other kind of cost considerations. One, these assessments are generally going to be driven by how long they take, because a lot of the C3POs will price them based on expected man hours to conduct the assessment. So the better organized you are, how tightly you scoped out where CUI is resident in your environment will go a long way to making the assessment go more quickly. Do you have your documentation all nice and organized, and have you really drawn that boundary around where CUI or FCI will be in your systems? That's going to help really make the assessment go much more quickly and therefore drive down costs. And the other thing, this whole C3PO market has been set up for competition to drive prices down. And so certainly some of the quotes that some of the firms are giving, the 37 C3POs, we have over 450 applicants. And so as we continue to authorize more C3POs into the market, we're very confident that the competitive nature will drive prices down and the market will stabilize at a certain point. So I recognize it's not a non-trivial cost. I'm not trying to hand wave that away at all. But it's also, again, if you're thinking long term, if you're going to be in business with DoD, this is an investment you certainly should plan for.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you. Another person asked, or it's a statement followed by a question. I've been told there are audit checklists that are being provided to third-party consultants that are not being made available to end users. Is that accurate? And if not, where do we find the checklist to prepare ourselves for the audits? They don't seem to be available anywhere that I can find today.
I mean, I'm not sure what checklist they're talking about. Pat might be more informed. Certainly the assessment guide is a DoD publication, and the initial version of that is still available on the DoD website. And then you can go back to NIST 800-171 Alpha, which is essentially the implementation document that complements the standard itself. There are a lot of practitioners have their own templates and tools and checklists to help, but there's nothing that the government's putting out that is not widely available.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And again, I think during the compliancy, there is other templates that are standardized that again C3POs are going to need to use, but those are more so of as they're going through that journey with the OSC, the organization that they're auditing, that there is a cadence of things happening and listed. So it's not so much of what a organization should do, but it's just helping them structure properly of how the audit is needed to be conducted, more or less. Again, me going through RP and RPA training and actually doing some CCP training gives me a little more insight into that. So again, I say that those templates are more helpful for the actual auditor than they are for the organization. It's really, what it really boils down to at the end of the day is that NIST 800-171A, making sure you're getting all the 110 citations, making sure you're getting all the objectives underneath those citations done. That should really be your driving point and nailing those down. And really furthermore, kind of to spin off this of kind of another thing that organizations are kind of missing the mark on is, okay, well, we have everything configured and everything is, firewall's configured the right way. Everything, we have, all these different good control sets. Policies and procedures seem to be lacking still across the board in small, medium, large businesses. I think the sooner the better of you mapping all 110 controls and getting control of those policies and procedures is going to show in ACEs how mature you are as in the environment, as well as having more evidence for a actual auditor to come through. Because again, if you were auditing and saying, hey, the firewall has NTP time set up, okay, wonderful. Well, tell me who told you to set it up that way, or what are you dictating, how are you standardizing, or how are you defining, right? Which is in the regulation that you're defining those things. Where are you defining it from? Was it just, because the person that set it up that way? Or is there some cadence, that you're showing that everything needs to be set up a specific way, which is, again, the maturity model is looking for. So the more you can get both your controls, your mechanisms in sync with a policy and control set, you're going to have both sides of the cards of showing maturity of, we have these policies and here's how they're implemented. Here's in real time, if you were to test or examine at that point, seeing both sides of the coin of, yep, this is our homework and this is, how we're doing it. So that way you can start really meeting those expectations for those regulations and citations within it.
Thank you. So I'll jump in with another question from the chat section, and I'll dovetail it onto a question that we had prepared for you, Pat. So the question in the chat section is, what are we expected, and anybody can answer this. So what are we expected to do if we have a subcontractor that we have to send CUI/CTI to for them to perform work on a product, but they're either unwilling or unable to bother with CMMC certification? Finding another vendor is not an option. So it's kind of a rock and a hard place there. Matt, what would you do in that case if you were this person?
Well, I'll certainly take the questioner at their word that there may not be another supply option. I find that in a market-based economy that there wouldn't be another supplier that you could find with some additional searching. But then that notwithstanding, listen, there's time, right? If someone's philosophically opposed to implementing the DFAR 7012 clause, then I'm not sure why they're in business with the prime to begin with. I don't have a good answer other than this is the wave of the future in the era of 5G, quantum computing, AI, IoT. How we manage digital risk is going to be a fabric of our society and our economy. So you can be in denial that you don't need to make the investments to protect, CUI, FCI, PII, financial information, IP. I mean, I try to encourage firms that take yourself away from your defense contracts. There's information you have, proprietary information in your business, your employees' personal identifiable information, financial data that cyber threat actors are going to want to get to as well. So if you're just not doing anything because you don't think you're at risk, well, there's a wake-up call coming here any day at some point. But these are all, again, the department is not asking folks to build quantum computers in their environments. It really is basic cyber hygiene. And I hope there aren't too many examples of subcontractors like the one cited in the question.
Yeah, I mean, and that's tough because I know that that's going to be a crux of a lot of migration, or again, the improvement of the maturity of CMMC for everyone to follow suit. But again, I think, that is, like Matt was saying, a lot of risk you're taking on because you now know at that point that vendor is stuck in well, it was good 20 years ago or 10 years ago, I can still keep on doing the same thing I've been doing. Again, I guess the biggest thing with that is, just look at cybersecurity threats and businesses that are affected. I mean, even in the town hall that Matt, had earlier this week with some other people from Project Spectrum, I mean, 40% of cyber threats occur within the DIB supply chain. So out of everything considered, 40% was claimed there, and 80% of businesses that are affected are by a small supplier. So those numbers hopefully are, striking a chord with some individuals here, but the writing is on the wall. Threats are not going to stop. They're only going to get more progressive and more intense. And the last thing that, the government wants is, the supply chain to collapse because of a ransomware attack or loss of data because China now has another fighter jet because they were able to go all the way up to the supply chain and manufacturing, wherever that is, to get that particular data of millions upon billions of dollars then lost, more or less in R&D work. So I think, it's the old ideology of if it's not broke, don't fix it. The government really wants everyone to follow suit. So that way we're all protected as well. Back to Matt's point, your IP is protected. That's the last thing you don't want of someone else stealing your IP, and then you're not unique in your specific space. So it's only going to improve both your cybersecurity for yourself and for the government. And then, try to bring along the people that are willing and able to make that journey with you.
Thank you, Pat. I have a comment. Somebody asked, is Arctic Wolf FedRAMP compliant now to be a monitoring partner? Short answer is no. Longer answer is we don't need or want CUI in any way, shape, or form to do our job. We're just processing metadata. Arctic Wolf is a 24/7 cyber threat monitoring service. We've got a lot of folks using us to satisfy a bunch of the different CMMC requirements. Because we don't store or process the CUI, then it kind of takes the data residency and some of the other issues away. And we can expand on that. That was a really good question, whoever asked it. But we can certainly expand on that in like the physical and logical way that we do our service and do cyber threat monitoring for folks. But that's a good question. Matt, I think we had something prepared for Pat, but I think you already answered it. The ramification for not being compliant with CMMC, I think you said earlier, Matt, which is you may not be able to bid on certain DoD projects in the future. And I think that's very real, right? Is that the teeth that you were talking about?
Yeah, that's part of the teeth. It's certainly one set of the teeth. And it's, to be clear, when rulemaking is completed and CMMC is operationalized, the department's indicated they're going to take a phased approach. So again, they're not going to just turn the light switch on and every contract is going to have this. Also, CMMC requirements will only be implemented into new or renewed contracts. So if a new procurement put on the street, it could and likely at some point will have CMMC requirements. And if something's been rebid, if the contract is up for recompetes, those can be inserted then. So it won't be retroactive. So you have the contract you currently have, even if you've got 800-171 requirements. They won't mod the contract to put CMMC, but you should know that, again, that contract is eligible for DIBCAC to come knocking at your door. And then the other set of teeth is what we talk about, and you see this in the National Cybersecurity Strategy this morning, False Claims Act, DOJ, you hear more and more about DOJ getting involved in this. But yes, you will not be eligible to bid on to be awarded a contract. So if you're not certified and you're going after a contract that has CMMC requirements, you're not qualified to bid, and you won't be, that bid won't be accepted. So it's a pretty important thing to not ignore.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is protect your income stream. If you're doing work and there's CUI involved, protect your income stream, get ahead of this stuff, and happily continue to serve new contracts. Thank you, Matt. Suraj, finally, we'll give you the microphone here. And again, I appreciate all these questions coming in. We're going to do our best to answer everything. I'm going to end this at noon out of respect for everybody's time. So if we didn't answer your question, again, we're going to send a survey out towards the end in an email, and you can ask questions there. We're all experts, and we'd be happy to help. Suraj, question for you. Do you have any statistics that you can share around what Arctic Wolf sees in terms of threat actor activity, specifically within the industrial-based customers that Arctic Wolf serves?
Thank you for the question, Jeff. So I don't have the exact number of ticketed incidents just for the defense industrial-based customers today, but I do have some stats that I can share surrounding the total percentage of ticketed incidents from the various telemetry source we collect from our 3,500 plus managed detection and response customers. So when you look at the tickets, the highest percentage of incidents come from network monitoring, which is roughly about 35%. That includes firewall log monitoring, followed by identity-related incidents, which is around 20%, and endpoints around 15%, which also includes EDR and antivirus logs. Similarly, clients that are using cloud computing or cloud monitoring that includes infrastructure as a service, software as a service is around 25%. And then finally, relating to account takeover risk, using stolen credentials and external vulnerabilities is around 5%. Now, Tetra Defense Team, which is now part of the Arctic Wolf incident response team, which deals with about 1,000 incidents a year, they found that external exposure was one of the primary root causes for successful ransomware attacks. And external exposure consists of a couple of things, right? So software exploits and remote access hijacking. So when you think about software exploits, they can be known or zero-day vulnerabilities that the threat actors exploit on a publicly accessible system to gain initial foothold. Which is one of the easiest way for these threat actors to exploit, and therefore also widely used. So software exploits account for about 48% of successful ransomware attacks. And then when you think about remote access hijacking, which requires some user interaction, for example, downloading a malicious document from phishing email, or convincing a user to perform an action on threat actors' behalf, which makes this less a reliable avenue of attack for the threat actors and accounts for about 25% of successful ransomware attacks. So given that, 76% of these ransomware attacks could be prevented if we had proper vulnerability management or phish-aware workforce. So.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Suraj. And we're seeing more and more people moving workflows into the cloud. So you think of like Office 365, Salesforce, Box, G Suite, Okta, Duo, all the MFA platforms. That's where a lot of the things are coming in these days. Mm-hmm. So just having the mentality that your environment is just what's in your four walls is no longer going to be acceptable.
Absolutely. So also when you think about, as people move to the cloud, there are many misconfigurations that can happen that which will lead into breach, right? So having some kind of cloud security posture management to monitor and make sure they're protected is also very important.
Absolutely. Yeah. And for those of you unfamiliar, cloud security posture management is things like, I don't have a wide open Amazon S3 bucket. I'm not, if I have Office 365, I don't have just mail forwarding rules that can be created without anyone knowing about it. Like stuff like that is very important. The cloud is great. We love it. Arctic Wolf exists in the cloud, but if you're not adopting to the fact that you have cloud workflows and applying the same stringent processes to evaluate your security in the cloud against CMMC controls, then there's a gap there. Matt, did you have anything to say on that?
No, not on that.
Okay. So this is the head in the sand question. Other people in my industry, Suraj, don't seem to be getting hacked. How important is this 24/7 monitoring thing anyway? Other than the fact that it's required to be compliant, why is it? I'm not hearing my friends and people that I know getting hacked.
Yeah, so it's funny. I do hear this type of question a lot too, and usually I say in cybersecurity, it's not a matter of if, but when, right? So we've all heard that saying, and I think it's truer now more than ever. So if you look at the Verizon data breach report from 2022, there has been a steady rise in ransomware cases. In 2021. The ransomware numbers were as high as the last 5 years combined. And if you think you're not the target, you should really think, especially when you consider CUI as compared to classified information. CUI is the path of least resistance for adversaries, and like Matt said earlier, is the weakest link, and that's why they're a prime target as well, right? So if you look at the threats for DoD contractors and subcontractors, they're not just only targeted by cyber criminals looking to make a quick buck, but also need to defend against nation-state threat actors who use more sophisticated tactics, tools, procedures. And so, when I sit on post-incident prospect calls, sales calls, with one of our incident response team, every single one of those companies wish they had done something prior to the breach, right, or to an incident. Another key consideration everybody should think about is also cyber insurance renewal, right? It's getting harder to get full coverage. And in some cases, our cyber insurance companies are starting to cut coverage for incidents such as ransomware. At the same time, are requiring things such as 24/7 monitoring, vulnerability management program, phish-aware workforce, right? And then other things like MFA, email, DNS security. So they don't have, so what they're trying to do is, they're not in the business to paying out these threat actors all the time. So they want to do some of their own risk management as well. So another interesting fact, according to the IBM data breach report, the average total cost of data breach was 4.35 million globally in 2022. And the organization, they started part of the research, 83% had more than one data breach. So I do understand, previous comments, it's true that the cost of security should not be more than the value of the asset. But the asset in question in today's context are not just physical assets. They're all the FCI and CUI that the government has entrusted your company, information that are crucial to national security and to the lives of our warfighters. So several things should be considered why we should protect our assets on a 24/7 basis, starting with the impact of an incident, such as reputation damage that can happen, capital losses that can incur, or operational downtime that an incident can cause. So threat actors, are often active during nights and weekends and around holidays, when they're least likely to be caught. And so 39% of these threats are detected between 8 p.m. and 8 a.m. by Arctic Wolf, right? Another example would be phishing attacks typically occur Monday morning when everybody's rushing through their email trying to get caught up, and they're just clicking on things that they're not supposed to. So this is why it is crucial to monitor your environment on a 24/7 basis to defend the organization against these adversaries and to stay a step ahead. So thanks.
I agree with that. Yeah, thank you. I've got one more question for you, Suraj. There will be a few that we don't get to today. I wasn't expecting the vast amount of questions, but I'm happily pleased by that. But if you could just answer this in about 60 seconds or less, Suraj, what type of logging does my organization need to have in place, and how long do I need to retain that data, or how would somebody answer that question?
That's a good question. So in context of CMMC, we need to protect CUI that's interested to the organization, whether it's at rest, in use, or in motion. So you can also review the CMMC 2.0 domain audit and accountability, specifically the controls 3.3.1 through 3.3.9, which includes things such as system auditing, user accountability, event review, audit correlation, and others. So in other words, we need to protect a full attack surface, which includes the organization's network, endpoint, cloud, identity, and human. So according to the memorandum from the Executive Office of the President for improving the federal government's investigative and remediation capabilities, related to cybersecurity incident, majority of the law categories, such as identity and credential management, email filtering, spam, phishing, operating system logs, right? Network device infrastructure logs, and many others. The retention period was 12 months of active storage and 18 months of cold data storage. So in my opinion, at a minimum, a year of log retention is a good cybersecurity practice, which would greatly benefit the digital forensics and incident response efforts of an organization if they need to get there. So
I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you for that feedback, Suraj. So landing the plane here, everybody. Number one, thank you. Don't hop off yet. We got a couple final thoughts here for those who are still on. Again, Matt, we really appreciate you being our guest speaker. This is very, very valuable, and you're very close to what's happening there, closer than all of us are. So thank you so much for your time and preparing for this, and being able to answer just off the cuff questions that you didn't even know were going to be thrown at you. So we appreciate that, Matt. Pat and Suraj, thank you for your expertise. Ken for helping moderate here and answer some of the questions. But on behalf of Arctic Wolf, the CMMC Accreditation Board, and Docs Electronics, we want to thank everybody for joining today.